A group is beneficial because it brings a bunch of users into a community or team. A group has 3 roles: super admin, admin, and member. These groups can be either public or private, meaning do we require a request for other users to join? There's also a maximum member count, preventing any additional users from joining if that limit has been reached. Now, this sounds very similar to Friends, but there are some key differences between the two. First, in how they scale. Friends are typically for one-to-one networks, whereas groups are for much larger communities. Second, how they're structured. Friends are peer relationships, whereas groups have hierarchies and roles. And finally, their purpose. Friends are for personal connections, whereas groups are for team-based features. Back in the GIF grab server project, we need to now create an RPC function that will allow us to fetch a group by ID on the server. The reason we're doing this on the server is because there is no method on the client side or the Flutter side that allows us to do this. So we're going to create this method on the back end, which is the RPC function, and then call that RPC function that will fetch the group by ID for us on the Flutter side. So I'm going to go to controllers. I'm going to create a group.go, and you'll notice I have some types and some utils here, and these are going to be very helpful when it comes to giving us the structures for the groups, as well as any util functions that will parse the requests, marshal the data, and log errors. So we'll say package group at the top, and I'm going to copy this method from friend.go because it's going to be a similar structure for the RPC, but it will be called get group by ID. And first thing we need to do is we need to get the request by parsing the payload. Then if error utils.parse requests, passing the payload, and then pass a pointer to requests. Then we need to handle if there was an error that happened. We'll call log and return runtime, pass in the logger. The message will say failed to unmarshal payload. Pass the error, and then we'll give an error code of 13. Then after that, we need to make sure that the group ID is not empty. If request group ID equals empty strings, we will pass in the logger here, and then the message will say group ID cannot be empty. It's not an error at all. It's just, it was empty. So we'll just pass 0 for the error, and then pass 3 for the error code. Then we need to actually get the groups by calling the groups get ID method on the Nakama module. nk.groups get ID, passing the context. It takes in an array of strings, but we're only passing the group ID for this query. If error does not equal nil, then we need to handle that. We will say, we'll first pass in the logger, and then we'll say fail to fetch group. Now, once we have groups, we need to make sure that the list of groups is not empty. So if it is, then we will return another error. This one will say group not found. And actually, it won't be an error. We'll just say group not found. Then we need to convert that group that we found to a response that is acceptable to send back to the client. Response equals new group response, and we'll pass in groups at index 0. And now we're going to marshal the response, and it'll give us the output, and that's what we will return to the client. Oops, not log and return. unmarshal response, and we'll pass in the response. Make sure that there is no error here, and if it is, we need to take care of that. I always want to add parentheses around this. I'm not used to go all the way. Utils, pass in the logger, and this will say failed to process response. Pass the error and give an error code of 13. If all that's good, then we can return the output with no error. That looks good. So now I'm going to go back over to main.go, and I'm going to add the method for registering that RPC function from group. Is it get group ID? Yeah, get group ID. Get group by ID. There we go. Now I'm going to build this and make sure everything's good. With that being built successfully, I'm now going to navigate over to the development server, and on testing there are no groups, but we can at least test the RPC function to see that we're getting the errors that we expect. So without entering any type of request information, it says failed to unmarshal payload, which is good. Now let's see what happens if I pass in a group ID, but then just pass in character F. It says failed to fetch group. So that means it actually sent a request to fetch a group for ID F, couldn't find it, said failed to fetch. So the errors are displaying properly. It looks like it's good to go ahead and push this up to production. Now it's time for us to be able to actually create a group. So I'm going to create a new block within the blocks directory for creating a group. I have a command already ready for making that block for us, but let me make sure I'm in the right directory. Presentation, blocks, and then we will make our Mason brick. Okay, so if I go over to group create, now we need to modify the state. So I'm going to change this to state class, and this will be group create state. And we're going to need a few properties on this state. First, we're going to need a short text field that will represent the name. It's a UI widget essentially. And we'll import it from gift-grab UI. By default, it will be pure. And then we'll pass it into the copy with as well. Okay. We also need one for description, and that'll be a long text widget. Oops, not dirty, pure. Description. Okay, then we also need a widget for modifying the max count, or how many people are actually allowed in the group, and that will be a range widget. It's going to be very similar to all these UI widgets as far as how they're created. And then the last, I guess, widget that we need on this state is a toggle for if this group is open or not to the public. And that'll be a toggle widget. Okay, we also need two more components on here. We need a form submission status property that will let us know what state the form is, whether it's initial state, it's working for submission, it failed, it succeeded, etc., etc. We'll call it status. And by default, the form is initial, but that can change at any point within the copy with method. No, status. And then finally, a success flag, which is going to be very similar to the error. And I'll explain why we have two properties for determining a success status, because we have it on the form submission status as well as the success flag here. But I'll explain why we need those two to be different in a little bit. Okay, the state is complete. So now let's head over to the event and create the events that we need for this block. Let me extend equatable on this really quickly. So we're going to need pretty much methods that will alter the values of those UI widgets that I explained earlier. Name changing, description changing, max count changing, open value changing, and then a method for actually saving the form itself. So let's start with the name changed method. And it will have a name on it. We'll just call it val, because these are all going to be very similar. So I think it'd probably be easier to have them use the same property name. Okay, we have name changed. Copy this for description changed. And do the same thing for max count changed, except this will be an integer. And not range, I'm sorry. Open changed, which is a bool. And then finally, we have method save form. I'll copy this just to save a little time. Save form. It won't need any properties because it's just going to read those properties from the state. Okay, so we have everything we need for the event. Now we can go over, oh, actually, there is one more thing I need to do. I need to go back to the state. I need to add a mixin. With FormzMixin, we're going to use this because I want to be able to assign all of the widgets that I want to use within this inputs field. That way I can use it for validation later on. And the ones that I want to add to that are name, description, and max count. I'm not going to add is open because it's just a true or false flag. So there really isn't anything to validate if it's on or off. It's always going to be right because it has a value. Okay, now if we go to the block, I'm going to take this out and I'm going to add the dependencies, Nakama base client, session service, and I'm also going to use this profanity API. It checks to see if any text that you entered contains any profanity, slurs, curse words, you name it. So I'll use this in order to prevent bad inputs being submitted for the name or description of a group. Okay. Now let me do the first event name changed for group create state. And this isn't going to need any run with error handling because it's just emitting a new value. And that value will be name. And it's going to be short text.dirty event.val. Then I'll register this here. Oops. Name changed. Okay. And I'm going to do this for pretty much all of the other methods. Description changed. On description changed. And it will change description long text. Okay, copy this. Let's do the same thing for max count changed. And it's going to change max count. And it's going to be range that's changing. Max count changed. Copy this one more time. And we're going to do this for is open changed. Or open change, I'm sorry. Which will be the toggle. And we're changing the open value. Okay, so we have all the methods registered. Well, we have all except one. We need to do the final save form. This would be a block event, save form, group, create state, and, well, let me register this to make sure I don't forget. Okay, so within here, it's going to be a few different components, some moving pieces in here to make sure that all this is working correctly. First, when we save the form, instead of submitting the is loading flag to true, I'm instead going to update the form submission status to in progress. After that, I then want to get a session, as always, from the session service. Then I want to actually check the name and description fields for any profanity. And I can do that by calling the profanity API, and it will return a response based on the results that it found with the information we provided. I'm going to call this name res, and it will equal the profanity API dot scan event dot, I'm sorry, not event, state dot name dot value. And do the same thing for description. Then I just need to simply come down and check and see if name res dot is profanity or description res is profanity. And if either of those conditions are true, then I'll throw an exception that says profanity and bad words are not welcomed here. And then it'll just essentially prevents the user from submitting this information. But if there is no profanity, then we can actually create the group. Passing the session, the name will be state.name.value. Description will be state.description.value. Max count will be state.maxCount.value. And open will be state.open.value. And this async so will await this, and it does return a new group, so I'm going to assign that here. So if everything runs successfully, then I'm just going to emit to the state a new success that says group, and I want to put the group name here, new group dot name, and if nothing's there, we'll just have empty brackets, group created. All right, and also I want to change the status of the form submission to, am I able to do that? Oh, I'm not in the copy with. Status, form submission success. Okay, that looks good. So now I'm going to come over to the group create page, and let me add what we need for this block really quick. Need a get Nakama client, need a session service, and we also need the profanity API dot instance. So if I scroll down, instead of returning this block builder, I'm going to instead return a block consumer, because we want to have a listener to listen to changes for when we make changes to creating a group, or when we make changes on the group create block. So this block consumer will be of type group create block, group create state, and let's go ahead and knock the listener out right here, and I'll put the builder down here too. No, I already did. Okay, I have to return a container right now. Oh, that wasn't what I wanted. Builder, context, state, return container. Okay, for the listener, the usual, if state has an error. So if state.error does not equal null, call the modal util to show that error. Otherwise, if there is a success, then we want to handle that as well. So first, actually I'll just copy this, and this will show a success instead. But we also want to pop back to the previous page, because we've just created the group, so there's nothing else to do on this form, so we're just going to leave the page completely. Then down here, I'm going to go ahead and build out the view. I'm going to return GG scaffold widget. Title will be create group. Child will be a safe area. And then that child will be this group. It will be this group form page that I built. And I'll explain that here right now. So this group form page, it essentially just provides all the widgets needed for making changes to the UI, as well as kind of handling when there's an update to one of those properties, and it's reusable for both editing and creating a group. So both the group create block and group update block will use this form. So just let me make sure that I have the most updated version of that. So I'm gonna save that just to make sure. Okay, so name is going to be state.name, and we're gonna need to create a block here too. We need the group create block. Okay, and when we have a name change, we call group create block and add the name changed event. Description, state description, and we'll call, pretty much it's gonna be the same flow for all these, except description changed. There's also a max count, but it's not required because max count can only be created. You can't edit the max count. So that's why it's nullable on this form. That way, when I use the group update block, it won't throw an error or it won't cause any problems. Let's add max count changed. Max count changed. Val. what's the issue? Gotta convert to int. Okay. And then state.open, and this will be opened. We'll take that off, and this will be open changed. And then finally on the submit, we're going to need to do a little work just to make sure that we can actually submit the form. So first thing we want to do is see if the form is valid. Form valid, and I can call forms dot validate state dot inputs, and then I'm going to see if the form is not valid. Then I want to display an error. Whoops. Form not valid, and then just return to make sure nothing else happens. However, if the form is valid, then I want to confirm that the user wants to submit. So call modal util show confirmation, and the title will be create group. Press yes to confirm. Now, if confirm is not true, then we just return, because we only want to accept true. Then we call group create block dot add save form if everything else falls through without any issues. Okay, group create page done. Yeah, I think that's good. So now I need to create a route for this. So I'm going to go to app routes, and let's create a new route for create group. And this will go to the group create page. And as always, come back to the main menu page, and let's create a menu button for going here. Groups, going to the group create page, create group. And that's all that we have to do. So let's see what this looks like when we run the app. All right, I'm going to go to groups. Excuse the text being super huge right now. For some reason, it's still using like an outdated version of this UI package, but it won't be this big, trust me. But anyways, let's go ahead and create a group. Let's call this ice cream team. Your favorite person for sweet treats. And this group will have 10 people in it at max, and it will be open to the public. So if we hit submit, it says group ice cream team created, and I can validate that it was created by coming over to the production server, going to groups, and I can see that ice cream team has been created with the information that we specified. Now we need to be able to list the groups that we either belong to or all of the potential groups that are out there, including the ones that we don't belong to but can join. And first I'm going to create a qubit that will be responsible for essentially being a listener for any changes related to the group, because we're going to be modifying group information in several parts of the app. So I'm going to go into the qubits directory. Let's see here, lib qubits, nope, presentation, qubits. Okay, and then I'm going to make a new qubit. Let's see here, Mason make Flutter block feature -- name group refresh, and it will be a qubit. Okay, let's go to that qubit, And I'm going to remove the state because we won't need this state class. The state for this will instead just be a date time because we simply just need something that will represent a change needs to be emitted on the state. And it could be a number increasing in value, or it could be something like a date time, which we'll use here because that will also be unique every time it changes. So we'll make the state of date time, and the first state will just be datetime.now. Oops, datetime now. Okay, and then we also need a method to call to emit that new state. Call it trigger refresh, and it will call emit datetime.now. Let's see here, and that'll be datetime as well. Oops, okay. Now I need to inject this at the top of the app because since we're going to be using this qubit in different parts of the app, we want it at the highest level of where qubits are being instantiated. So right under here, I'll create a block provider for the group refresh qubit. Group refresh qubit. Just like that. That's all we need there. So that's taken care of. Now we need to create a block for actually listing the groups that we either belong to or are out there for us to join. So I'm going to go into the blocks directory now. Call that same command again, but we'll change this to block. And this will be group list. Now let's change the state on the group list. That'll be the first thing that we need to modify. Block group list state. Okay, I'm changing this to state class, group list state, and add the imports. Now the things that we need on this state are we need a UID to represent the currently authenticated user because we need that UID to determine if we're checking for groups in whole, like just in general, or groups that only I belong to. And then of course we need the Nakama based client and a session service. So for this state, we need a UID to represent the currently authenticated user, list of groups that are going to represent whatever groups we're looking for. We need a nullable string for the cursor that's going to represent where we are for fetching data when it comes to pagination. And we also need a Boolean flag clear cursor that will let us know if we need to explicitly set the cursor back to null. So I'm going to add these in now. Final string UID, final list group, groups, final string nullable cursor. And actually we don't need the clear cursor on the state. We just need that in the copy with method. So let's add UID here. Groups by default will be an empty array, and then the cursor will be the cursor. And then within here, nullable string for UID, nullable group list for groups, nullable string for cursor, and a Boolean value clear cursor that will be false by default. And we'll handle that there in a second. So UID that's passed in, or the one that's on the state. The groups is groups, or the one that's on the state. Now for cursor, I'm going to check and see, are we clearing the cursor? If so, set cursor explicitly to null. Otherwise, we're going to check if the cursor passed in has value. If not, we'll just use the one that's already on the state. And I'll add that. And then just finish up with adding these to the props. Groups, cursor. Okay, now I'm going to go over to group list event. And I'll make this extend equatable. And this is going to be very similar to the friends list, because friends list had initial fetch, fetch more, and fetch friends. So we're going to follow the same type of procedure here. I'm going to have the initial fetch method, initial fetch extends group list event. Override properties. Okay, got initial fetch. I'm gonna do the same thing for fetch more. And then I'll do the same thing for fetch groups. Now let's go ahead and go over to the group list block and start mapping this out. I'm going to add in the values that we need. We need a nullable string UID. If it's null, that means we're getting all groups. If there is a value, that means we want the groups that I belong to or have a certain relationship with. Nakama based client and session service. Okay, now let's add the first event for initial fetch. And it'll be the state group list state. This one isn't using run with error handling. It's just a straight emit. So we're first going to emit the is loading flag to true. And also we are going to clear groups out because we may potentially call initial fetch again. And when we do, we want to make sure that we start with an empty list. And then we'll actually call fetch groups. And I'm going to do the same thing for fetch more. But instead of clearing out groups, we're going to pass the cursor. So whatever cursor is currently on the state, we're going to keep that going through onto the next state. And then I'll add this up here. Oh, didn't mean to do that. Okay. And then last but not least, the actual fetch groups method. All right, that looks good. Now let's provide the action for actually fetching the groups. First thing is always, we need a session before we can do anything. Then once we have the session, I'm going to create a variable to represent the groups. Group, call this groups, and a nullable string to represent the cursor. We'll get these values after we call the request from the client. So first we need to check and see if the UID is null. Because if it's null, like I said, that means we just want all the groups. So call the client and call list groups. We'll pass in a session, pass in the cursor, which will be the cursor that's on the state, and then also a limit, which will be the group list limit that I have in my global variables, which I have set to 10. So we're fetching 10 groups at a time. Once we do that, we then have the group list object right here. And then from there, we can extract what we need from it, which is the groups themselves. Group list groups. And if that's null, then we'll just do an empty array. And we also need the cursor from the group list. Null if empty. And the reason we're doing that is because I've noticed that the value for the cursor can either be empty or null, depending on what platform you're using. I forget which one is which, but I noticed that there is a discrepancy there. So in order to make sure this works across all platforms, we apply the null if empty extension here. essentially saying, unless you have value, we're treating you as null. If you're empty string, you're null. If you're null, you're null. Now, if the UID has value, we're going to do a similar thing, but slightly different. We'll call list user groups. It sounds similar, but it's different, even down to the value that's brought back. So let's first add what we need for list user groups. We need the cursor. We need a limit applied. And we also need the user ID for this one. Now, in order to get the groups from this, we got to do a little extra work, because group list in this sense gives us a user group list, which is slightly different from just a group list. And that's because it contains group membership state information as well as the group. But we don't care about that. We just want the actual group. Let's see. So we're going to map the values, and we're going to take off the group from it. So we'll use UG as to represent the value within the list that we are currently at, and we'll grab the group off of it, convert it back to a list. And if at any point this doesn't parse well, or we have any issue, then we fall back to return an empty group list. And let's set the cursor to be off the group list as well. Null if empty. Now, once that's out the way, we then need to check and see, are the groups empty? And if the groups are empty, then we just return the state and we don't do anything else, because there's nothing to add or change. But we are turning the is loading flag off technically, so that is one thing that's changing. If groups is empty, emit state.copy with no values, and then return. However, if we get past that, that means that we've fetched new groups. So let's go ahead and emit those to the new state. Groups will equal the groups that are currently on the state, as well as the new groups that we have just been able to fetch from the client, or by using the client. And we'll also pass cursor. Now, one thing that I have to remember to add is we're going to call clear cursor here. If this equals true, then that means that we actually want to explicitly set cursor back to null. So this looks good. Now we can actually go over to the group list page, and let's start mapping this out. So at the top, I'm going to have a Boolean value called all that will let us know if we're searching for all groups or just the ones that I pertain to. And we'll pass it in as a named parameter. And then in here, since the group list block requires a UID, I'm going to get that off of the account information. So let's first reference the account read block. And then get the account information off the account read block. And I'm going to assume that there's an account present. If you're this deep into the app, you've made it pretty far, my friend. So we're not going to worry about that. So if all is true, then we send null for the group list block. Null, if all, then null. Otherwise, account.user.id. Okay. And then we also need get Nakama client and a session service. That looks good. Now I'm going to come down here and let's start providing the UI. So I'm going to have, let's first get the values that we need. We need the groups off the state. We're going to need to know, are we loading? We're also going to need the cursor. Okay. And I'm going to add some extra variables here that will just let us know if we should be displaying an empty view, which means there's nothing on the screen, a no results view to let the user know there's been no results found, or if we should be displaying the more button for fetching more results. And the logic is different for each of these. So we'll display an empty view when the state is loading or is loading, and I can't type it, groups is empty. So we'll display empty in that condition. We'll display no results if we're not loading anymore, and groups is empty. And then finally, we display the more button if we're not loading, and state, cursor, null if empty does not equal null. So pretty much that says the cursor has a value. It's not empty or null. So we'll display the more button to fetch more results. So then I come down here and let's create the column first. And the first widget will be an expanded widget that's going to hold the list view. I'll just call it container right now. Now, first thing within expanded that we need to check for, we're going to say display empty. Then we will display a size box.shrink. However, if that's not the case, then we're going to determine, do we need to display no results? And if that's the case, then return the no results widget for all groups. And if neither of those cases are true, then that means that we can actually just return list view builder. This is getting pretty deep over here, so I'm going to wrap it up with a container for a hot second. Okay. For the list view builder, item count will be groups.length, and we're not going to return a container. We're going to return a group list tile, and we'll pass in groups at that index. Okay, I think that that's good. Yeah, let's rock with that. So now under the expanded widget, we can provide the button for fetching more results, and it'll be called the more button. So if display more button, then let's return, and let's give it some padding first. Edge inset all 16. Child will be an elevated button. And it will say more. That should be a text widget. Okay, and the on press is where we're going to call the group list block to fetch more results. And I didn't create that block, so I'm going to go back up top and create that here. Final f context.read. I always name the block after, or copy and paste it rather. Group list block, just to make sure that I spell it completely right every time. And then down here in the more button, or for the on press, I want to add the event for fetch more. All right, I think I can clean up some of these blue squigglies. Dart fix dash dash apply. Now I'm going to actually create the page that's going to hold these two list pages, because the group list page shows one list, but we're going to essentially have two lists for a reason that I'm sure you already know by now: the list of groups that we are a part of or have a relation to, and then all groups in general. So I'm going to create a new page called groups page. Stateless widget groups page. Let's import from material, and up top I'm going to have a list of strings that will represent the titles of the tabs. So it's just an array that says one all groups and the other says my groups. Then I want to have a tab that will represent the actual list pages under those two tabs. Let me see, list, group, list page, get tabs content, and that will point to an array of group list page. The first all will be true, and the second one will be false. All right, that looks good. Now let's go down to the builder, and let's keep that there for right now, but I'm going to provide the theme up top. And then let's return a block builder, actually. Block builder. And this is going to be listening for changes, not on the block we created, but on the qubit we created, the group refresh qubit. And that's because whenever we make a change on another page that deals with the group, this qubit will get that update note to rebuild, and then we'll have a fresh group list page. Date time. So for the builder, context state. And let's turn the container for a second. So within here, we could just start off by returning first the GG scaffold widget. GG scaffold widget, title, groups, and that child will be a default tab controller. The length will be tabs.length, and then the child of that will be a column. Now I'm going to get back to that in 1 second, but first I want to add some actions on this page, because from the group page we'll then now navigate to creating a group. So how we have it currently, we create the group on that page itself, but we want to make room for this page. So the navigation will go, you go to the groups page first, then you can navigate to the create groups page. Let's create an icon button.field tonal that we'll call context.pushNamed, and we will go to go routes, create group .name, and that icon will be icons.add. Okay, now back within the column, this is going to be very similar to the friends page actually, so I think this is a good time to copy and paste. I want to actually just take this whole GG scaffold widget. I need this button though. All right, this is what we're going to do. Paste this here, take this button out, get everything else gone, add the button back up here. Actions. All right, and I think everything else is good. Tabs content. Oh, it's because that's, well, no. What do I have? Oh, tab content. Tabs content. There we go. I think that's good. Everything looks like it's in place. So now I'm going to go to app routes, and we're going to modify the routing just a little bit. So as you can see right now, we're going to create group first. We're going to change that to now. I need to add that to go routes real quick. Page for groups. And that will be this route here for groups, which goes to the groups page. And then the nested route on there will be that create group create page. Okay. And then back on the main menu page, we're going to change this from going to create group. Instead, it's going to go to groups. Okay. Now, also within the updating of a group, which is on the group create page, I believe, I need to look for the listener for when we have a successful update or successful creation, rather. So right here, we have the success. So right within here, I can actually call that group refresh qubit and called trigger refresh. So now this is essentially saying once we have a successful creation of a group, we then want to go to the groups page and trigger a new state and rebuild these two pages to make sure that they have the most up-to-date data. And while I'm here, that reminds me that we need to call the initial fetch on this block. So when we create group list block, we need to call initial fetch. And I think that is all we need. There is no group refresh page. So let's build this and see what this looks like in the app now. Inside of the app now, if I click groups, I now navigate to the groups page. I have all the groups and then groups that I have an affiliation with. So listing is working good. Let's make sure that when we create a new group that's updated. Let's call this iOS 26 gold team rules. Let's add a member limit of 10 and this will be an open group. Let's hit submit. I'm pushed back to the previous page. The page rebuilt and I can see iOS 26 has now been added to the list for both my groups and all groups. Oh, let me call that. Uh-oh, got a little bug here. That's not good. So why is that not changing? Let me see. I think it has something to do with the group list state. Let's see. Clear cursor equals false. If it equals true. I think I have that backwards maybe. Let me go back to the group list block. We clear the cursor if it's null. So let's try that now. If I hit more, there we go. All right, so group list block is fetching the groups how we need, and we're also able to listen to changes using our group refresh qubit. Remember the RPC function that we created in the first step for being able to fetch a group? Well, now we're going to be able to call that RPC function because we need to actually fetch a group for the group read component. So let's create a new block in the groups directory. Not groups directory, I'm sorry, blocks directory. Mason make Flutter block feature name group read type block style basic. Okay, let's go to the new block. And first thing, modify the state. Let's see, state class, group read state. And the only thing that we need on this state is a group, a nullable group. So we'll add that at the top, nullable group, import the Nakama package. And then we'll add the group in to the constructor as well as the copy with method. And our properties. All right, then let's go to the event. Not there. Group read event. We need an event for reading the group. Read group extends group read event. How is it doing that? Const. No, I don't think I'm doing that. What's going on? Read group. All right, that looks good. Now let's create a new entry to the enum for RPC functions because we want one for getting a group by ID. Get group by ID. And then let's head back over to the block And let's add in what we need for this block. I'm gonna take this out. We're going to need a group ID, so we know which group to fetch. Then we need Nakama based client and session service. And let's pass those in. All right, now down here, we're going to create a helper function that will call the RPC function. I believe we're doing a similar thing with the friends, but let's create a function that returns a nullable group called get group by ID, and it requires a session and a group ID. And let's call the client client.rpc, pass in a session. ID is rpc functions.getGroupById.id, and the payload is going to be JSON encode of a map of the group ID and the group ID, or the key group ID, and then passing the group ID. All right, that looks good. Now let's check and make sure that it's not null. Even though we never really should run into this issue, we're going to have this check here, because if it is null for whatever reason, then we would just throw an exception and handle it that way. But it's a more distinct way to know exactly what happened by having this check here. So null, return null. Otherwise, let's call group.fromJSON, and we will JSON decode the result. All right, now up here, let's create the event for reading a group. Read group, group read state. On read group, read group. And then within here, let's go ahead and start the procedure. First thing first, we need to have a state that says is loading is true, so we can get that spinner going. Then we need a session before we can do anything, as always. And then we can call our helper function and pass in the group ID to fetch the group. And then since group could be nullable, let's make sure that it's not. If group equals null, then just throw an exception. Group not found. Otherwise, let's emit to the state the new group that we have. All right, now let's go to the group details page, which is essentially the group read page right now. I want to change that name to group details page. Let's see here. All right, now what we need for the group read block, group ID. So let's make sure we pass that in up top. And then pass it here. Needs to get Nakama client and session service. And let's also be sure to call read group immediately when we go to this page. Now let's modify the view. Let's first get those properties that we need. We need a group from the state. And then also, are we loading? Okay, now let's return a GG scaffold widget here. Title will be the group name, actually, if we have one. So we'll add the question mark to make sure that we handle that situation if it's null. Then let's return a safe area for pretty much the body of the widget. Then, you know what, just so I can make sure I'm good. All right, there we go. Now, if we're loading, circular progress indicator. inside of a center. Okay, now if we're not loading, let's check, is the group null? If it is, no results widget for, let's just say, all groups. However, if we're not loading and the group is not null, then let's actually display the group information. Let's first add some padding. Edge in sets all, let's do 32. And we will return a column for now that will only have a few components inside. Right now, because the main point is we just want to make sure we can read a group, so I'm not going to bore you with the details of group information and applying it to a UI. So instead here, we're just going to display the group name at the top, optional avatar if they have one, and then 2 placeholders that will represent where we will be applying information in the future. First child is a network circle avatar, passing in the group.avatar URL, radius 100. And then under that, we'll just display an expanded widget. Oh, let's give it some space actually. Eight. Okay. Then just an expanded widget that will hold the 2 placeholders. So this will be a row, another expanded widget, and it will be placeholder. And let's give it a color, colors.purple. And I'm going to do the same thing twice. So let's copy that, everything in here. All right, and add const to all that. All right, let's see if I can do the Dart fix dash apply to clean this up a little bit. All right, that looks great. Now we need a way to get here as always, so I'm going to modify go routes. First I need to add a go route for group details. This is the page that we're working on. Group details. And then within here, let's create a new route for, the groups page. Go route, group details, goes to the group details page. Now we need to pass in a group ID, and we can do that by using a path parameter. Let's first add it to the path, group ID. Then we can extract that, the group ID from the path, state.path parameters, group ID, and then let's check and see if that group ID, which is a group ID, I put group ID. Let's see if it's null. Group ID equals null. Throw exception. Group ID null. But if we're good, then we'll just pass the group ID here, like that. And now let's modify where we will actually call on the Go router to navigate to this page, which will be the group list tile. So right now, when you click on a group list tile, it just has a modal pop-up say go to details, but we'll change that because we want to actually go to a named route. And that route is group details. And then we also need to pass the path parameter of group ID. Okay, that looks good. Let's see what this looks like. All right, let's go to groups. Let me take these off. All right, these are the groups that I have. So let's go ahead and click one, click Joe Budden Podcast. We're navigated to a group details page with the avatar URL. None of these groups have avatars at the start, so they're all going to have this empty man, but we are able to at least read our group now because we're calling the read group event and it's displaying the username or the group name at the top. So we're about halfway through the CRUD operations for a group. We're able to read, list, and create. Now we need to work on being able to update a group. It's going to be very similar to creating a group, so I'm going to do a lot of copying and pasting, but first let's create that block for updating a group. Mason make a Flutter block feature -- name group update type block style basic. And I'm going to open up the group create, and we're just going to do these side by side because they're going to be very similar. So let's update, let's copy and paste everything in here into the group update state. And let's change this to group update state. Add the gift grab UI components, equatable, FormzMixin, and error state. All right, change that. Group update state, not group create state. And let's see, we don't need the max count because we're not able to modify the amount of people who are allowed in a group after it's been created, so we don't need to worry about editing that. So I'm going to take out any reference of max count here or range. Range, take that out. We need to import that. Oh, and take it out right here. I think group update state is good now. Let's head over to the event, group update event and group create event. It's going to be very similar here, so I'm going to copy and paste that as well. Group update event. And we don't need max count, so let's take that one out. And let's see, there we go. Whoops. And we also need a method for init form because we need to know what name, description, and value for open or closed should be the default values for the form when the page loads. Group update event. And this is going to require a group because we need the information of the group. And properties here. All right, that looks good. And save form, we're actually going to pass in a group ID. So let's add that here. All right, I think the group update event is good. Now let's head over to the block. Group create block and group update block, very similar. Let's take all this. Group update event and group update state. Okay, let's import. This should say group update block. Group update state. Don't need max count changed. We will need init form. On init form. Let's see, name change. We need group update state. Group update state. No max count change method needed. On open changed. On save form. Okay. For on init form, let's go ahead and create that one. Init form for the group update state. This doesn't need to run with error handling. It's just an init that's going to provide the default form values. So let's set the name to be short text .dirty. That means the form has been edited or updated, and that will be event.group.name. And if that value is null, then we'll provide an empty string for the form. And we'll do the same thing for description and open as well. Description, long text, and open, which will be the toggle. And we'll change that to open dot false if null. I think that's good. Now let's come down to save form, and we're going to modify this a little bit. We do want to send this to in progress, get a session, check the profanity. The difference is we're not creating a group now, we're updating one, and we don't have the ability to change the max count. We also need to add a language tag, and I'll just put English by default, and we need a group ID as well. All right, updated group. We're not going to do anything with updated group. Actually, we might as well take it out because we're not doing anything. We're just updating it and then letting the user know that the group has been updated. Group updated. All right, I think that's pretty good. Now let's head over to the page, group update page, or better way to call it, edit group page. Let's change all this. Edit group view. All right, and in here we're going to need a group object that we will pass in to the page as well as the view. I'll do that here in a second. Let's make that necessary for the edit group view. All right, now what does the group update block need? We need client, get Nakama client, session service, whoops, context.read session service, and profanity API. Okay, let's come down to the view, and let's copy that from the group details page. We're gonna copy, matter of fact, let's copy all this, and let's just change what we need to change. It's gonna be very similar, so let's save some time. I'm not sure how much I just copied. What did I copy? Turn block consumer. Okay, we can do that then. Let's paste all this in here. So we need the group update block here. This will be for group update block, group update state. Modal util, we'll add that in. So we display error if we have one. If there's a success, we want to make sure that we trigger that group refresh qubit, and then we want to pop back to true to let the previous page know there was a successful update to the group. So that looks good. Let's add the GG scaffold widget, change this to update group, import group form page. We're going to be using our group update block instead when it comes to name change, description change, don't need max count, open change, and as well as when we save the form. So let's see, update group, add false if null, and then pass in the group ID for our save form. I got an extra something here. That's for that one. That's for that one. Okay, and where's the other one? Oh, one more, I think. Okay, there we go. So now let's go down to the at routes and create a new route for edit profile. Let's see here. We want it to be nested. I'm sorry, not edit profile, edit group. It's going to be a nested route on go routes. So let's do this. Go, whoops, not go route. Actually, go route. There we go. Edit group, which will go to the edit group page. Now we need an actual group object here, so let's get that as an extra param off of the route. We can do that by calling it, or calling it from the state.extra as group, and then we'll pass in the group right here. Okay, so the route is good. Now we need to modify how we get to this page, and we get there from the group details page. And we're going to make a button within the scaffold that will navigate to this page. So let's add some actions. Now we only want to display this button if I actually am the owner of the group. That means I've created it. I shouldn't be able to edit a group that I did not create. So we need to check the group creator ID and compare it to the current account ID of the user that's logged in. So let's first get the account read block. I'm a little lazy, but account read block. And then get the account from the account read block. All right. And now within here, we'll check and see if account.user.id equals group.creator ID. And the group could be nullable at this point. We're comparing it to the account user ID, so this won't error out or anything like that. It just will be false if we don't have a group yet. If they are equal, then that's when we can provide the button. Icon button field tonal, on pressed. I don't think I did that right actually. Async right here. All right, let me add the icon. Icons.edit. Okay, then here we'll just call this should update, and we're going to await the result of going to that edit group page. So this will return a Boolean value, and we'll go to go routes dot edit group dot name, and we need to add both the group ID and an extra parameter, which is the group itself. Path parameters, group ID, group.id, and we need this because it's a nested route under group details, and group details requires the group ID. So we always have to make sure that that path contains that variable. I'm going to assume that we have the group by the time a user would click on this button. So you might want to add a check here to make sure that it doesn't error out, but I'm going to assume that the group has already been loaded by the time that they would click that. And then we also need to add an extra value, which is just the group. Then we need to check and see if should update is not true, then just return. That means there was no success, or the user came back and just didn't make any changes. Otherwise, then we're going to actually read the group again. So let me call context dot read group read block, and right here we will call read group again. All right, I think that's good. Let's see what this looks like in the app. All right, I'm in the app. I'm going to click on groups. Click a group. I don't own this one, so I can't edit it. I did create iOS 26 though, so let's go ahead and edit this one. It didn't initialize the form. Got to go back up here. Group read block. No, I'm sorry, not this one. Edit group page. I always seem to forget this, but when we create the block, got to make sure that we call init form. All right, let's try this again. Groups, iOS 26, edit. All right, now we have our values. So I'm going to change this to iOS 27. Hit submit. And as you can see, the name was updated here, as well as within the list. Back on this page, it should say iOS 27 now. So we're able to update our group successfully. Being able to delete a group is also a very vital part of any operation when it comes to CRUD. So we're going to focus on that now, being able to delete a group. Let's create a block for that. Mason make Flutter block feature -- name group delete -- type block -- style basic. Let's see, go to presentation, blocks, group delete, and let's modify the state. Group delete state, equatable, and error state. The only thing that we need on this state is a success flag that lets us know if the deletion was successful or not. No, not success. And then we need to modify the group delete event. It's only one event in this group, and that is delete group. And it doesn't need any parameters, so we're good with just this. Now let's head over to the block and take this out. Let's add in what we need. We need a group ID to know which group we're deleting, Nakama based clients, and session service. All right, now let's create the event. Delete group for group delete state. Hold on, group delete state, and register up here to make sure I don't forget. Okay, now the first thing, let's set the is loading flag to true. Then get a session. Then we can just call the client and call delete group. Delete group, pass in the session, and we have the group ID. And then last but very important step, we need to admit to the state that we had a successful deletion. So let's just have a generic message that says group deleted successfully. Now let's head over to group delete page. We don't need that because this is more just an operation type block, but we will need to head over to group details because that is where the user will be able to delete a group. Group details page. All right, so first thing, we need to inject the group details block. So we already have the group read block injected here. So we're going to instead return a multi-block provider now. The child of the multi-block provider will be the group details view. And let's create a new block provider for delete group. All right, passing the group ID, get Nakama client, and session service. I'm gonna just copy that. Okay, so we now have both blocks injected. Now we need to add a listener down here in the view because we want to listen for a successful operation on the group delete block. So I'm going to take all of this entire block builder, and wrap it in a block listener for the group delete block. let's see, provide context and state. Let me just add the child back in here, which will be that block builder that we just copy and paste it. So within here, the usual, if state.error is not null, then let's let the user know what the error was. However, if we are to have a success, by success not being null, we will show that success, of course, show success. So if we have a successful deletion, we then need to call the group refresh qubit to let the previous page know, the one that lists the groups. We need to let it know that a change has happened because we just removed a group from the database. So we need the group refresh qubit. Group refresh qubit. And then within here, we'll just call trigger refresh. So the listener is good. Now we need to add the button within here that will trigger the deletion. And it'll be very similar to this. We only want to be able to delete if we're able to edit. So this check right here will be good for providing the button for deleting. So let's change this. We'll call this confirm instead. Final confirm equals modal util dot show confirmation, and it will say delete group. Press yes to confirm. Now, if we get the confirm and it's not true, let me await that. Confirm dot false if null. So if confirm is true, then we can call the group delete block, which I don't think I created yet. Let me do that. Call group delete block in here, and then we'll call delete group. And let's also change this to be delete button. That looks good. Let's see what this looks like in the app now. Let's go to groups and let's find a group that I created, iOS 27. I have the delete button. If I hit this and press yes, group deleted successfully. Okay, but it didn't pop us back. Okay, I think I left that out. When we delete, we want to pop back. Context.pop, because there's nothing else to view on the page that we just deleted. So let's try this again. So we were able to delete, but let's see if it works by popping us back now. All right, we pop back to the previous page. The group was deleted. I'll do one more. List groups here is currently in the list. Let's hit delete. And the group's gone. So we're able to delete our group successfully. Now it's time to wrap up the groups part of the series, and we're going to focus on being able to search for groups since we have already finished all the CRUD operations that we can perform on groups. So search groups is essentially a list CRUD operation. So this is going to be very similar to the listing feature that we used for friends. So a lot of copy and paste, but let's go ahead and get started. So we don't need to create a new block for that. We're essentially going to be working with the group list block. So I will come to group list, and first thing that we need to do is we need to modify the state and have a query on the state. The query is going to be used for when we're searching for a group, and we will make it a mandatory string, and by default it will be an empty string, and pass it into the constructor. And then down to our properties. Okay, we have query in there. Now we need to add two new events. the search groups and clear search. And we can actually get that from the friends list block. Let me go to the event. No, it wasn't friends. I'm sorry. It was with user, the user list. If we go to user list event, we have clear search and search user. So I'm going to copy these two and just paste these in here to group list event because they're very similar, except there will be a group list event extension. And this will be search group. And we'll search by name. All right, that all looks good. Now let's go over to the group list block. And I'm going to open up the user list block as well. And let's take this on search user and clear search. Let's paste these down here. And then let's register these. I'm going to need to change the name of this one. It's not search user, search group. And it's for group list state. Let's do the same thing here. Group list state. And I'm going to register these to make sure we don't have any issues later on. Search group on search group and clear search on clear search. All right, let's go down to search group. We are going to take out most of this. Actually, we're going to take out all this. We don't need error handling, just an emit here. So let's emit state.copy with. Actually, we have a few steps to do here. It's not just an emit. First, let's get the name of whatever our query was. So we get the name from the search group event. And then I want to update the query on the state with that name. Let's see, query will equal name.null if empty. So if it equals null, then we just return an empty string. Otherwise, we want to set the query to be the name, but we also, and this is very important, we want to add the %sign at the end. This is essentially saying search for results that would include name in the prefix. So if I search for the Joe Budden podcast and I type in Joe, or I type in the Joe, then the group would show up by adding this %sign. Without that, we have to type in the name specifically, and that's a little tedious. So this helps out when it comes to searching a little bit more efficiently. And then we'll just call initial fetch, because we always want to create a new search. We want to fetch again whenever we update the query. So we have on search group good. And then for here, clear search, query gets set to empty string, but we need to set groups to an empty array. Okay. Now we need to create a search groups page within the view, not a new folder. Let me see. Search groups page. And I'm going to copy this from search users page because these are very similar. Going to need a lot of imports. Let me go back there, search users page. I'm going to see if I can add some of these imports in here. All right, so this is called search groups page. And this will be search groups view. And we're going to provide a block provider for the group list block. For the UID, it's just null. Oh, one thing I forgot to do is back in the block for group lists, we need to modify the fetch to now include the name as the query. So it's nullable, so it doesn't affect our normal listing of groups. But if we do provide a query, then we will set that to the name and we'll get only those results. All right, so let's get back to search groups page. Now I'm going to modify this. We're not returning a user list block, we're returning a group list block. And this will be called search groups, not groups, groups. What else? Enter name, and we'll pass in group list block here. We'll call search group with that query. Change this. All right, that's all good. Let's change this to a group list block and a group list state. Let's get the groups. All right, let's keep going. Users empty. We want groups is empty. Let's change the no results enum from users to groups or my groups. Let's check the group's length, and instead of a users list tile here, we will return a group list tile and pass in groups at that index. And I think that's it. I think everything else is solid. Oh, we need to navigate there. So let's create a new route. Search groups. And then let's go to app routes, and let's add in a new route for searching a group. It will be on the groups page, so it will be a nested route here. It's called go route, and this is for search groups, going to the search groups page. And then on the groups page, we need to provide the button that will allow us to navigate over to the search groups page. So within here, oh, I need to change this. This isn't friends. Let's change that to groups. All right. Down, where am I at? Oh, okay. So we have this button that takes us to create a group. Let's add some padding between that. And we'll copy and paste this. This will go to search groups, and the icon will be a search icon. Okay, let's see what this looks like. All right, let's go to groups, and let's hit this search icon to now search for groups. And remember, these are the current list of groups, so our search wasn't affected by adding the query to the state. So let's search for ice cream team. Let's just type in ice. And if we enter, ice cream team is displayed. Let's try Joe now. And the Joe Budden podcast pops up. So in theory, if we have more than one, if I were to have Joe Budden podcast 1, 2, 3, 4, then all those would be listed. But this is the only group that has Joe within the name. Really close here, Bobby Johnson, but still not Joe. So it looks like our search feature is working good and groups is essentially complete.